Hey. I bet you thought I wasn't going to make it when you saw 10 seconds on the clock and I wasn't up here, but I'm very speedy. It's great to see everybody. If you haven't already, you can come back and take your seats. Happy Mother's Day to the mothers in the room, and thank you to those of us joining online. Happy Mother's Day to you. If your mother's out there, and if you're not, thanks for being here. We're glad to have you all. Excited to be together this morning. If you're new here with us, would you please grab one of the blue cards in the seat backs in front of you that say new here? I would love the opportunity to get to know you a little bit and say thanks for being our guest, take you out to a cup of coffee and all that good stuff. And I can only do that if I know who you are. So if you do that, if you're online, you can hit our website and connect with us there. And I'd love to have a coffee with you as well. A couple things I mentioned last week, and then I realized that I never put the link for the sign up. So now I'm mentioning again that on May 24th, we have the opportunity to have that financial workshop with an advisor from Thrivent, which is like a nonprofit financial advisor company, but they work with churches. It's a charity, and they work with churches to try to help us be more financially healthy and make our values line up with where our dollars actually go, or I guess the other way around, make our dollars line up with where our values are. And so it's not a sales pitch, but I think it would be something that would be really helpful for you, and I would love for you to come. You got to sign up, though, and I need you to sign up like this week so that we know if we have enough people and how many people to buy food for and all that stuff, okay? So that's online, hrcc.church/sign up or whatever, or you can just go to hrcc.church and click sign up. That's good too. And then also the ladies' night out is on May 30th this month. They're going to be going to Baker's to have dinner together on May 30th, ladies only. So sign up for that just so we know how many people to get a table for and all that good stuff. And that's also online in the sign up section, all right? All right, so over the last several weeks, we've been dealing with and living in this tension of unanswered prayers, of waiting, suffering, and apparent silence from the Lord. I really believe that God must have orchestrated all of this, the arc of these last few sermons, even carrying from the But God series into this one, because so many of us are going through exactly these kinds of seasons. And many of you have told me that these sermons are like speaking into your exact situation that you find yourself in. And so I'm really thankful that God is working through that. And just so you know, I have also definitely been in that kind of a season. I've also been wrestling with God in prayer over the last few weeks. And the Lord has used this time and study in Habakkuk in a mighty way in my own life too. And I say that because I want each of you to know that if you find yourself in that kind of moment where God seems silent and distant or even unconcerned, you're not alone in this room this morning. There are so many people in our church family who are walking right alongside you on that same kind of road. All right, so in week 1, we looked at, all right, I just got to say something. I've always said Habakkuk, and other people say Habakkuk, and I asked the internet, and the internet told me that it mostly is pronounced Habakkuk, and I'm really going to try to do that this morning, but I'm probably just going to say Habakkuk, because that's what I've always said, probably because that's what my dad said, and he's a hillbilly, so there you go. In week 1, we looked at Habakkuk's opening prayer of lament to God. See, I just did it. I couldn't even last one time. And we discussed lament as a form of prayer that has mostly been lost in the modern church, I think at least. Lament is a structured kind of prayer that comes out of a place of deep, intense suffering or grief. And God accepts that as a valid way to pray. Habakkuk's cry, "How long, O Lord?" sounds like a man who had lost his faith. But the very fact that he's still talking to God shows that he still has all the faith that he needs. Last week, We looked at God's response to that opening prayer of lament. And we talked about what to do when God's answer to your prayer seems worse than the problem in the first place. That when we don't understand the full scope of what might be happening, the most important thing we can do is just keep the conversation going. Because regardless of how things look on the outside, God will not let evil have the final word. Today, we're going to pick up where we left off last week. We're still in chapter 1, 3 sermons in, still in chapter 1. You got to love that. The answer that God had given to Habakkuk seemed like something that could not possibly be true to his character. So Habakkuk is faced with a choice. He could either decide that God must be some kind of moral monster and turn his back and walk away, or he could decide that he might not understand the full picture yet and keep the conversation going. And that's where we're going to pick up the story today. Like we've been doing, I'm just going to read the entire portion of text so that you can kind of feel the weight and the emotion of it all in one reading, and then we'll come back through and break it down. He says, Lord, are you not from everlasting? My God, my Holy One, you will never die. You, Lord, have appointed them to execute judgment. You, my rock, have ordained them to punish. Remember, we're talking about the Babylonians here. Your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrongdoing. Why then do you tolerate the treacherous? Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those more righteous than themselves? You have made people like the fish in the sea, like the sea creatures that have no ruler. The wicked foe pulls all of them up with hooks. He catches them in his net. He gathers them up in his dragnet. And so he rejoices and is glad. Therefore he sacrifices to his net and burns incense to his dragnet. For by his net he lives in luxury and enjoys the choicest food. Is he to keep on emptying his net, destroying nations without mercy? Now, this is a kind of haunting and sad, but also beautiful and theologically rich pattern for prayer. It's almost like Habakkuk heard God's shocking answer and kind of had to take a step back and just be like, okay, I need to reframe what I know really quick. You ever had a moment like that? I remember one time I had a coworker who insisted on having this really strange competitive relationship with me, even though that wasn't something that I wanted or entertained. And one day he came into my office and was talking to me about a decision that had been made. I don't even remember what it was. But he was just insisting oh man, our boss is really mad at you. He was so upset, and he was telling me he's freaking out. You need to you better really hide and worry and all this stuff. He was trying to get me all freaked out. And for a minute, I was like, oh no, I had that pit in my stomach, oh, what did I do? But then I took a step back and reframed what I knew to be true, which is that my boss at that time was one of the most integrity-filled men I've ever known, and I've personally witnessed him many times refuse to talk about other people in situations that don't involve them. Every time there's ever been an issue, he has talked directly to me, calmly about it, and we've worked through it. So, did it really seem credible that he would be telling my coworker about how upset he was with me? I don't think so. There must be something more going on. So I just said to him, well, I guess I'll have to talk to him and see what's going on, but all I know is that every time there's ever been an issue, he's talked to me directly, so I'm not going to freak out about it. And that is kind of exactly what I think Habakkuk is doing here. What he's heard doesn't seem like it can be true based on what he knows about God. So something more must be going on. And before Habakkuk speaks another word of protest, he first reframes his own mindset and grounds himself in the reality of who God is. He says, Lord, are you not from everlasting? My God, my Holy One, you will never die. Yahweh is the everlasting God. He has always existed before the world was formed, and he will never pass away. Habakkuk is grounding himself in the fact that God has a far more grand perspective than he has from inside the story. He's conceding the point that maybe there are parts to this that he just doesn't understand yet. But that's not all he's doing. Because in these next few verses, he's also laying the theological groundwork for his next argument. And inside this opening statement is something that is unique and surprising in the entire scriptures. Now, Habakkuk is already kind of unique among the prophets because of the direction of his address in the whole book. Typically, prophets mostly speak to people on behalf of God. But in Habakkuk is entirely the prophet speaking to God on behalf of the people. And his prayer relationship with God is shockingly personal. Think about what's been happening. He's been crying out against God in this whole book so far, accusing God of complacency towards sin and towards evil, and even complicity in its perpetration. But this is his most audacious claim yet, because other prophets will repeatedly address Yahweh, our God, as the Holy One, or the Holy One of Israel. It's like his formal royal covenantal title. But here, Habakkuk addresses him as my God, my Holy One. He's the only one that makes a claim like that. Holiness is the attribute most often used to describe God's terrifying otherness. When God's holiness is in view, seraphim cover their faces. Elders prostrate themselves and cast their crowns like we sang about this morning. Prophets fall down like they're dead. Priests approach under only the rarest circumstances and with great trepidation. Yet Habakkuk attaches the most intimate, possessive expression that the Hebrew language has to that exact attribute. And he does it mid-complaint while he's upset and frustrated. This is a man who knows that God is both holy and near. You remember when we talked about that a few weeks ago? Understand that. Because when we read Habakkuk, I'm just going to go back. I'm tripping over it too much every time. When we read Habakkuk, we're not watching a man spout off at God in a moment of frustration when things aren't going his way. We're watching a man who has developed this level of intimacy through long years of cultivating the relationship. Habakkuk grounds his complaint against God in certainty about God's character and nature. He is eternal. He is unchanging. He is holy, and he is near. And God's holiness becomes the basis of Habakkuk's complaint, and God's nearness is the reason he can make it. We've been asking a lot of questions lately about what to do when God seems silent. What to do when God doesn't seem to be holding up his end of the deal. What to do when we feel lost and abandoned and nothing in our lives seems to make sense. And maybe we're getting something of an answer to those questions right here. Because the answer to life's hardest questions is not best discovered in a moment of crisis. The answer to life's hardest questions is best discovered in a lifetime of conversations. Which begs a really important question of us this morning. What are you cultivating today in your relationship with God that will become the basis of the relationship in life's most difficult moments in the future? Are you developing the kind of intimacy now that opens the door for this kind of raw honesty then? And maybe today you say, man, I haven't really developed that kind of deep, intimate prayer relationship with God. But now I'm already in the moment of trouble. Well, I would say to you that the same advice that applies to investing in anything also applies to investing in your prayer life, which is that the best time to start investing was 20 years ago, and the second best time to start is right now. Start now. In the middle of the unknown, in the middle of the battle, in the middle of the uncertainty. Lean in to getting to know the unchanging God who is both holy and near. Habakkuk prays, Lord, are you not from everlasting? My God, my Holy One, you will never die. You, Lord, have appointed them to execute judgment. You, my rock, have ordained them to punish. Your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrongdoing. As shocking and horrifying as it was for him to hear that God himself was the one who is raising up the Babylonians against them, Habakkuk has come to terms with God's word. He's conceded the point there. He's laying out a bunch of facts that don't seem to go together. You're everlasting, you're holy, you're my God and my protector, my rock, that's what that means. And you've appointed and ordained the Babylonians to bring judgment and punishment upon Judah. Yet, that holiness that makes you who you are, that also makes it so you can't look upon evil and just tolerate wrongdoing. And because of all of those things, because they're all true at the same time, and because I've cultivated a deep personal relationship with you, you owe me an answer. Habakkuk laid a careful foundation of what he knows to be true about God, which allows him to then bring his hardest question. In verse 13, he says, "Why then do you tolerate the treacherous? Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those more righteous than themselves?" In other words, he's saying, if you are really holy, how can you tolerate using a people who are evil to accomplish your purposes? If you are really the everlasting God who is faithful to your covenant promises, then how could you allow your people Judah to be destroyed? Habakkuk's objection is the moral question of instrumental evil. The question that has been wrestled by faithful saints throughout the generations. How could God do this and still be the God that I know? If you've ever had that kind of question, you know that's a difficult place to be in. A place of deep mourning, of loneliness and confusion, an unbearable tension. And I wish that I could tell you that all that tension is going to be resolved today, but we're not there yet. But we are going to learn how to posture ourselves in that tension. Habakkuk is looking into the face of an existential threat to the people of Judah. The Babylonian Empire is not just bad, it's like earth-shattering. They are anti-God in the truest sense of the term, the exact opposite of everything he is. And Habakkuk paints this image vividly. Verse 14, he says, "You've made people like the fish in the sea, like the sea creatures that have no ruler. The wicked foe pulls all of them up with hooks. He catches them with his net. He gathers them up in his dragnet, and so he rejoices and is glad. Therefore he sacrifices to his net and burns incense to his dragnet. For by his net he lives in luxury and enjoys the choicest food." Now, way back in Genesis 1, God created the earth and all its creatures. He gave mankind a mandate that included ruling over the fish in the sea. But Habakkuk sees this Babylonian onslaught as the undoing of God's created order. The people have now become the fish in the sea. They have no proper ruler. And the Babylonians have made themselves God. Gods of destruction, unmaking the world as they go. 3 images are used to describe their destructive lust. First, the hook. They capture individuals. They snuff them out one by one. They make them prisoners. Then a throw net. They uproot local communities, destroy neighborhoods. And then the dragnet. They're pulling up everything in their path. And it's that final image, the dragnet, that represents indiscriminate destruction. That image is the most damning. It's one thing to wrap your mind around God working within geopolitical conflict, like between nations at war, or even in like conflicts between an empire and a local community or an individual. But to condone an empire that is hell-bent on indiscriminately destroying everything in its path, a people who have made themselves their own gods, worshiping the means of their own power and the methods of their destruction, this is unthinkable. This is God's good order and his creation working in reverse. Habakkuk is not crying out to God because Babylon is scary. Habakkuk is crying out because Babylon has taken the place of God and seems to be getting away with it. Now, it's no surprise when we look at images like this that Babylon becomes a stand-in metaphor in the entire Bible used to describe every empire in every age. That fact, by the way, is the key that unlocks a responsible reading of the book of Revelation. Every empire that sets itself up as its own God, that sacrifices at the altars of power and wealth, that strips humans of their God-given dignity and makes them little more than animals, that undermines and destroys the natural order that God created in his good world, is deeply guilty, as God told Habakkuk a few weeks ago, and is subject to the judgment of God. That's why the great rallying cry of the book of Revelation, meant for Christians under every empire in every age, is come out of her. Come out of Babylon. Because you cannot simultaneously be a citizen of Babylon and a citizen of the kingdom of God. Yet, we live in an age when even Christians in our culture are obsessed with the allure of power and wealth that the empire has to offer. Many people who claim to worship Jesus with their words have lives that reveal that the true object of their worship is politics or money or power or the illusion of safety and control. Habakkuk was terrified by the Babylonians because they represented an existential threat to the people of God. And as the people of God today, we are no less susceptible to the threat of empire. Even now, the hooks and the throw nets and the drag nets of empire are in the waters all around the world, waiting to pull up Christians and devour us. The allure of the trappings and promises made by the kingdoms of the earth is a constant temptation for followers of Jesus. And so we must remain vigilant. Never let our guards down. Holding on to our identity as citizens and members of Christ. Because if we lose that focus, we can easily be caught up in the indiscriminate destruction and the ways of empire in our world. On this image of Babylon as the indiscriminate destroyer and unmaker of the world, Habakkuk lands his final question. Is he to keep on emptying his net and destroying nations without mercy? I want you to notice the bookends of his argument in this section of text. Two rhetorical questions that frame the logic. Are you not from everlasting? And is Babylon to keep on destroying? Here's what Habakkuk is saying. Yahweh is the eternal Lord and ruler over the world, but Babylon has taken his place and is setting the rules. And these two things are incompatible. One of them has to give. Either God is no longer in control, or Babylon must be dealt with. If God is eternal, before Babylon and after Babylon, then that logically means that Babylon must be dealt with. They can't keep going on forever. It's an incredibly coherent and faithful argument. And I know I've been repeating, but I want to lay it out one more time so you can see clearly what he's doing. God is eternal. God is holy. God's holiness and Babylon's evil can't coexist forever. If God and Babylon have both made claims to be the ruler of this world, one of them has to give up. And if God is eternal and holy, it can't be him. So do something about it, is basically what he's saying. This is the most powerful and faith-filled way that you can pray when you don't understand what God is doing. When circumstances are happening in the world that don't seem to make sense. When you're faced with the biggest, hardest questions about the relationship between God and evil. When you're wondering how it can be possible that a God who is good and a God who is holy could be involved with suffering and pain in this world. You take what is true about God, and you take what is true about your circumstances, and you pray them right back to God. Not as a petulant child demanding to get his own way, but as a confident son or daughter who knows the heart and the character of their father. The message of Habakkuk isn't to try to answer the problem of evil. The message of Habakkuk is to show us the proper posture to relate with God through the problem of evil. And that's what he does next. He's made his complaint that God wasn't listening, wasn't responding, wasn't dealing with evil in Judah. God did respond. But the answer was even worse than the problem. The way he's going to deal with the evil in Judah is with the evil of the Babylonians. Habakkuk went back again, reasoning with God. If you're holy and everlasting, you can't let them get away with this forever. What are you going to do about it? And now it's time to wait. How many of you really love waiting? Anyone? Waiting's just your jam, Todd. You did some waiting last night. We humans are not very good at waiting, are we? We like to be people of action. We like to feel like we're in control. We want to take matters into our own hands, not leave things up to someone else. We want to do what we want. We want what we want, and we want it now. Waiting feels like giving up, just letting life happen to me. But that is not the kind of waiting that Habakkuk is about to show us. Chapter 2, verse 1. He says, I will stand at my watchpost. I will remain stationed on the city wall. I will keep watching so I can see what he says to me and can know how I should answer when he counters my argument. Now, in the Hebrew, this is all military language. Habakkuk has planted his flag. He's made his argument, and now he's going to position himself like a soldier watching over his city. This is not quiet resignation. It's not a simple, well, I guess we'll see what happens. This is active waiting upon the Lord. And it's the posture of a faithful person who's in a season of lament. I want you to notice three important elements about Habakkuk's posture toward God, and we're almost done. The first one is that Habakkuk expects to be answered. Not, maybe God will answer me. Not, so I can see if he answers me. Habakkuk is standing guard like a military watchman. He's waiting for a messenger to be dispatched to him or waiting to find the first sign of danger on the horizon. He doesn't know what God's answer is going to be. Remember, the last time God answered his prayer, it was more terrible than he could have ever imagined. But whatever it is, he's preparing for it. A couple of months ago in our Culture Carriers series, we proclaimed that one of the culture statements of our church is that we pray with expectation. We pray like it really matters. Easy to say, not so easy to live. When you feel like life has been beating you down on every side, when it seems like you can't find your way back to God's presence, like he's gone silent, like you've been abandoned, when you've been crying out and the answer hasn't come yet, it can be hard to keep praying with genuine expectation that God will answer. And unfortunately, that means that many of us simply give up. Today, I would ask you, what prayer have you given up on because you no longer expect that God will answer? The posture of a person who prays in faith is a posture of expectation. Number two, Habakkuk is ready to be corrected. He says, so I can know how I should answer when he counters my argument. We have to name attention here. Because on the one hand, it takes incredible faith and courage and audacity to go toe-to-toe with God. Habakkuk is a hero of the faith because he refused to just accept an inconceivable answer and kept on wrestling with God through it. But there's also a requisite amount of humility required in this endeavor. If you're going to accuse the everlasting, immovable, unchangeable God of violating his own character, you better be ready to find out that you might be wrong. Habakkuk fully expects to be answered, and he fully expects that answer to challenge and correct his understanding of who God is. It's important that we grasp that tension. Because when you consider the idea of wrestling with God in prayer, of arguing with God, as people often say it, of declaring to him that we believe we've been wronged or that he owes us an explanation, I think sometimes we approach him with heels dug in. We view this as an exercise of getting him to bend to our will. We take something like the parable of the persistent widow out of context and begin to think that if we can just stubbornly come back to God enough, he will eventually give us what we want. But that is not at all the posture that Habakkuk teaches us. He isn't climbing in his watchtower to stubbornly insist that God gives him what he wants. He's climbing his watchtower to stubbornly insist that God catches him up in the story of what he wants. Even if it means that it's hard to hear, difficult to understand, and causes more questions than answers, Habakkuk is ready for the Lord to correct his thinking. And I would ask you today, in what area of your life do you need to allow the Lord to correct your thinking? What prayer have you been praying without even considering that God might want you to see a broader perspective? Habakkuk expects an answer, but he doesn't expect it to be final. He's already prepared for the discussion to continue. Which is number 3, he's committed to the conversation. He says, I'll stand at my watchpost. I will remain stationed on the city wall. I will keep watching so I can see what he says to me and can know how I should answer when he counters my argument. There is nothing that God can say to him that is going to cause him to turn back and turn his back on God and run away from his watchpost. He is as committed to his post in the watchtower as a soldier would be. He's walked too far with the Lord. He knows him too intimately. Yahweh is not just a God to him, not even the God to him. To Habakkuk, he is my God, my Holy One. He knows well enough to be confident that his understanding cannot contain the God of the universe, but he also knows well enough to be confident that God is faithful, God is good, God can be trusted, and God will not just abandon his people. So if the story hasn't ended with God's faithfulness and character upheld, then the story isn't over. And I would ask you today, what story in your life have you ejected on too quickly before you allowed God to teach you through the end of the story? Maybe today it's time for you to commit to the conversation again. As your pastor, I'm aware that so many of you, including myself, are in seasons of struggle right now. I'm aware of the hurt and the suffering and the longing. I know that some of you are facing health diagnoses for you or a family member that seem hopeless. I know that some of you are experiencing the pain of a prodigal son or daughter. I know some of you have lives that have been in near constant upheaval, and you just can't seem to catch a break. I know some of you have marriages that are struggling. I know some of you are still dealing with the effects of a past trauma. I know some of you are wrestling with addiction or habitual sin that you just can't seem to get free from. I know some of you have a dream that God placed on your heart that somehow died over the years, and now you're haunted by what could have been. I know some of you are at a place where you're trying to decide whether to give up on God altogether. Maybe you feel like he's let you down, like you've been disappointed, like you don't understand why your life is the way that it is. Wherever you are this morning, this is my plea to you. Let your faith arise and climb back into your watchtower one more time. Take up your post again. Cry out to God with expectation that he will answer. Be ready to hear what he has to say, even if it hurts. Make a fresh commitment that you're not going to turn your back and walk away. No matter what happens, that you will keep the conversation going. Because if the story that you're in hasn't ended with God's faithfulness and character being upheld, then the story isn't over yet. Climb back into your watchtower and don't come back down until you have an answer, until you have met with God, until you have seen that he is good and he can be trusted. Remember, this is not about you stubbornly insisting that he does what you want. It's about you stubbornly insisting that he catches you up in his story. And if what he's doing doesn't make sense, if the answer he gives causes even more questions, if you can't seem to understand why he has brought you to the place that you're in, then keep coming back to him again and again and again. Don't stop talking to him. Don't stop bringing your hardest questions. Faith isn't the absence of hard questions. Faith is the foundation that enables you to ask them in the first place. Which of you here will have the courage and the faith to take on the posture of Habakkuk and climb into your watchpost again? Which of you here will look out onto the horizon of your understanding and actively search out the understanding that God is bringing your way? Which of you will bring your greatest source of pain, your greatest source of doubt, your greatest source of struggle, your biggest, hardest questions, and let God teach you how to walk with him right in the middle of them? Today we have been talking about a posture of prayer. Posture is incredibly important. It signals something in the physical realm that's what's really going on in your inner woman or man. And if you're among those today who would say, yeah, I'm going to take a step of faith, I'm going to climb back into my watchtower, and I'm going to wrestle with the Lord again. And I'm going to ask you to reflect that step in your posture today by coming forward to the altar, and we're going to pray together. And you don't have to worry about being alone, because I'm going to be the first one that responds to the altar call, right? So I already know there's one. Ethan's just going to play in the background. We're not going to even sing a song. We're just going to gather together and cry out to God. And so online, we're going to say goodbye to you now. We love you.